So this is the Nikon S2. It's this one in particular was manufactured in 1956 or thereabouts, and this lens is the 5 cm Nikkor H f2 lens in S mount, obviously, and was manufactured give or take 1947. So this is my first impressions of it. I got it in the mail today. Can't wait to use it. Have not shot a roll through it yet, but I have high hopes because I love the Nikon F. Here's a Nikon F from 1965, so roughly 10 years after this, with a lens from 1964, again, 10 years after this era. So yeah, I love this camera, love this lens. I mean, here's a later Nikon F, 1966, with a wide angle on it. This is my actual user camera. I love the Nikon F, and I hope that translates over to this the rangefinder bodies. Now, Nikon made these rangefinder bodies before they made the SLR bodies. And in fact, the Nikon F, if you take off the mirror box and recess the lens back a bit, and then add a viewfinder, and then a whole bunch of other things, you actually get the Nikon SP. This was based off the Nikon SP to the point where a lot of these parts will actually interchange directly with the Nikon SP, which is the later version of this. So Nikon came out with the Nikon 1, then the Nikon M, and then the S, the S2, which this is, and then later on the S3, the SP, and the S4. But and then there are a few later models, but those are irrelevant because those are reissues of earlier versions. Anyway, what Nikon did here was they combined sort of the overall framework of the Contax camera and put it in a camera with a Leica shutter. And here's a Barnack Leica from 1953 lens. It's a Leica 3C, and the lens is a Summerit 5 cm f1.5. So again, these are very contemporary to each other, so directly comparable. And just having these next to each other, I mean, yes, it's a Leica, it's famous, it's high quality, this, whatever. But honestly, having these two next to each other, I prefer this one. It just feels far more refined. For like one, it has a winding lever over a winding knob, which is certainly nice. But also it has, bayonet mount lens. It's a S mount lens. That's much easier to change, even though with rangefinders, you're not really going to be changing lenses all that often. The viewfinder is much brighter. This has, apparently, from what I've heard from people that own most of the S-series cameras, the nicest viewfinder of them all. And especially if you shoot in a 50mm lens. I mean, this only has frame lines for 50mm. If you shoot in a 50mm lens, this is likely going to be the best S camera for you to use, because the viewfinder on this, I can say from firsthand, it's absolutely huge and bright and clear, and the rangefinder patch is very contrasty, at least on my example. So in comparison to the Leica, where this is dark with no frame lines and the rangefinder is a bit weak. I mean, my example is particularly weak because it needs a new mirror, but overall, this just feels far more refined than this. I mean, it's a Leica, so obviously the build quality is excellent on this, and it just feels wonderful. But again, the Nikon, they really knew what they were doing, and I just can't wait to see what this glass can do, because I have high hopes for this glass, because the F mount analogous lens to that is this one, the 50mm f2 Nikkor H in F mount. And I love this lens. This is a famous lens, seen in a whole bunch of movies, like Full Metal Jacket is the first one that comes to mind for me. Although that was mounted on a Nikkor Mat FTN, but we won't get into semantics. This lens is excellent. It's famous for being an excellent lens in F mount. Probably the sharpest 50 in my opinion, at least due to my testing. So I hope this actually outperforms that at least a little bit, because this is a rangefinder optic. They don't have to create optical concessions to clear a mirror box in there, because the flange distance on the Nikon F is famously large, and that's due to the fact that it has to clear the mirror that slaps up. So this one doesn't have a mirror to slap up, so you can actually have that lens stick further into the body, like much further into the body, like about there. So you don't actually have to interrupt the optical formula to have a retrofocus design. So in theory, you can get a better lens. SLR lenses tend to have barrel distortion when they actually distort, but rangefinder lenses tend to have pincushion distortion when they distort. So a little bit different, not exactly better or worse, but whatever. And sharpness and contrast is generally improved with rangefinder optics. Anyway, The shutter in the Nikon S2 is made of cloth, rubberized silk to be exact. So similar to the Leica, where if you leave it out without a lens cap on, you have the potential of burning your shutter curtain because the lens focuses the sun onto it, which is kind of bad. Where like the Nikon F here has a titanium shutter where it doesn't matter if you leave it. I mean, actually it's irrelevant because it has a mirror that blocks it. But let's just say if you had one of the later rangefinders which had the titanium shutters in it, you wouldn't have to worry about the shutter combusting spontaneously. Anyway, the S2, it just feels wonderful because it's made by Nikon, mid-century Nikon. Um, Build quality is unparalleled, at least in Japan. The focusing on this is smooth. The shutter just sounds immaculate. It's gorgeous. I can't wait to get shooting with this because it's just a beautiful camera. I mean, if you have a beautiful camera like this, nothing away from the Leica. The Leica is a beautiful camera too. When you pick it up, you just want to start shooting street photography with it. And the Nikon F certainly is a wonderful experience to shoot with. Bare bones experience, especially with the unmetered prism and just a 50 on here, just brings you back to the fundamentals of SLR photography. Really good camera. But likewise, I think the same thing about the S2. You pick this thing up, you just want to go shooting. It just feels so conducive to picture taking. Oh, that's a bit stuck there. There we go. There we go. Conducive to picture taking. The wind just asks for you to move the film on. The shutter is snappy and precise. The lenses, from what I hear, are excellent. The rangefinder is just a joy to use. So I'm really excited to take this thing out. So yeah, that's my first impressions of the Nikon S2.